Tell me when, Mike.
Go.
Good evening. Welcome to this forum on a very important topic for around the country and around the world. We are going to hear from Cassandra Devereaux. This is a meeting of the Communist Workers League and our online website, fightingwords.net. Before we start, a couple of short announcements. My name is David Soul. I'll chair this evening. We have some people in the audience and we have some people on Zoom. First thing is that Cassandra Devereaux's writings are available by searching in the archives of fighting-words.net. We also have a hard copy pamphlet called Coeur d'Alene and the Legacy of Hate, a four-part series that Cassandra wrote for Fighting Words, and you can order those from the website. We also wanted to make mention of the announcement that political prisoner Ruchell McGee is finally going to be freed. Ruchell was part of the attempt to free George Jackson by his younger brother, Jonathan Jackson, August 7th, 1970. They tried to escape. George Jackson was not present in the courtroom, but a number of prisoners took some hostages, a judge, some jurors, and the police opened fire on their van, killing everybody except Ruchell McGee. He's been in prison. He was in prison already at least 7 years before then, and he's been serving now 53 years in prison for the Marin County, what they call a Marin County slave revolt. So we'll have more information on that shortly. So without further ado, we'd like to invite, let me read a quick biographical biography of our speaker tonight. Cassandra Devereaux, a transgender, neurodivergent writer and artist living in the outskirts of San Francisco Bay Area. In 2020, she ran for state assembly as a Peace and Freedom Party candidate in order to draw attention to the problems of police murder of Black and brown people in Vallejo, California. She concerns herself with issues of trans rights and the threads of the modern day. And the talk tonight is called The Growing Fascist Threat to Transgender Lives. And I'll turn this camera around. We have several people in the audience here.
Actually. All right. Good. Well, it's afternoon here. Good evening elsewhere. As he said, my name is Cassie Devereaux. Been asked to talk about, as you're here for, the fascist attacks on transgender community and transgender lives. I apologize for not having a webcam, so you're just going to have to imagine my beautiful face tonight. Most of this material that I will be covering has been published in my article on Fighting Words. I hope I've added enough new stuff to be interesting to those who've read it. I am not an expert on trans people, but I have been out and in the community since the 90s. I'm also not an expert on the far right, but I have researched and written several times about the far right in US history, and I keep my ears to the ground on their doings. I hope I can be informative. I'll try to answer any questions. Answering questions is not a strength, and I'm one of those people who has the perfect answers 10 hours after being asked. And I'm also going to invoke some statistics. Please keep in mind that each of us trans people are more than just trans. I've never met a trans person who has suffered no oppressions. I've lost jobs, been denied work, faced workplace harassment without help from management, even when they weren't the ones doing harassing. I've spent years getting no nibbles on a resume until I removed elements that let on that I'm trans, and thereafter left interviews when the interviewer saw me and hurried me out the door. At the same time, while I don't know any trans person who has faced no discrimination, it is undeniable that national and other oppressions multiply the severity. And we see that when we escalate to the point we look at lists of those who are murdered in any year, and they are dominated by Black trans women. I thought that was important to point out. And that said, let me begin. In 1933, a town councilor in Paris was very concerned by what he called a moral crisis. This crisis was the fact that those known as inverts at the time existed, and moreover, that they had the nerve to do so in public. Invert was a common term for what we call members of the LGBTQ2 plus community today. This counselor is remembered today for saying, "Far be it for me to want to turn to fascism. But all the same, we have to agree that in some things, those regimes have sometimes done good. One day, Hitler and Mussolini woke up and said, honestly, the scandal has gone on long enough, and the inverts were chased out of Germany and Italy the very next day." End quote. Of course, we know that they were not chased out by fascists. They were murdered outside or inside concentration camps. The Nazis gained support in part by attacking the least offended targets first, the ones for whom support was minimal and public disdain was high. A few months after coming to power in May of 1933, the Nazis came to power in January of 1933, so this is May, 96 days into Nazi rule, Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science was ransacked. Himself gay, Hirschfeld studied and advocated for gay rights. Most notably, he was a pioneer in understanding transgender as something other than a flavor of gay, and he performed the earliest gender confirmation surgery. The most iconic photographs of book burnings that you've seen are likely to be that of the library of the Institute. The research that went up in smoke and ash as the Nazi machine gathered steam. Naturally, this was not the end of fascist attacks on transgender folks by Nazis. In a real sense, it was the beginning of a larger attack on all of their enemies. In the 1800s, German poet Heinrich Heine said, "Where they have burned books, they will end up in burning human beings," and so they did. In 2019, Kelly Jane Keen-Minshall, who goes by the name of Posey Parker, gave an interview to Jean-François Garapé. Parker is a part of the British establishment of women who fashion themselves as feminists, who are dubbed trans-exclusionary radical feminists, or TERFs. The political project of TERFs is to attack not patriarchal systems, but the political rights, well-being, and dignity of trans people. Parker is admired by Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, herself the celebrity figurehead of transphobic hate. Garapé is a podcast host and a white nationalist who believes in the genetic superiority of white people and frequently hosts infamous fellow white nationalist Richard Spencer. While they had some small disagreements on the role of women in society, the interview was marked by a gleeful shared disgust for and opposition to trans rights and trans lives. Parker wasn't always outwardly transphobic. In years past, on the UK-based forum Mumsnet, she expressed a belief that attacking trans people was a wedge issue that detracted from winning women's rights. Today, she believes the opposite, saying that losing the right to an abortion is an acceptable loss, in defending women's rights to bodily autonomy is a wedge issue that detracts from the attack on trans rights. Earlier this year, Parker took her hateful rhetoric to New Zealand for one of her Let Women Speak rallies. She was met by a cadre of neo-Nazis, members of a group called the National Socialist Movement, including some wearing skull masks and patches for the neo-Nazi Azov Battalion in Ukraine, and the Boogaloo Boys. They welcomed her with Nazi salutes and chants of white power. Parker always insists that Nazis be allowed to speak at her rallies, as long as cis women. Hello? As long as cis women TERFs get their chance to speak before cis men. Smiling fondly as Nazis confronted protesters behind her, she declared that fascist is the new word for legend. Indeed, such sympathies were on full display in the social media profile picture she once had of a Barbie doll dressed in the uniform of a Nazi SS officer. In an interview she gave while in New Zealand, she invoked a classic anti-Semitic trope. She said, "Do you not know that the billionaires who are billionaire men who are pushing this ideology and funding it, are you not aware of those people?" End quote. Interviewer Kim Hall followed up Parker's claim by asking, "No, tell me more," repeatedly, as Parker failed to offer a shred of evidence. And in the end, Parker refused to address the topic further. Despite her obvious, explicitly fascist sympathy, she remains a popular thought leader in the TERF movement. While a few TERFs argue for distancing themselves from her on the basis of optics, J.K. Rowling and the majority of this crew continuously express support for Parker, even as her admiration for fashion becomes explicit. Fascism is not a deal breaker, and fascists get a foot in the door. They're passed the mic at the rallies, given access to TERF ears, as well as anyone curious about that movement. They're allowed to recruit, and TERFs adapt, in turn, fascist tactics such as hiding razor blades beneath their posters so anyone attempting to remove them is cut. It needs emphasizing and underscoring that Parker did not start out embracing fascism. She once legitimately aimed to maintain and win rights for women. However,
this is very boring still.
I'm hearing someone. I'll continue. However, fascists found in her a prejudice that is so common as to appear common sense. They reinforced that hate and praised her for it. And when she started to talk about her bigotry,
Is that black man in the crowd?
I think someone's got their microphone on. When she started to talk about her bigotry and trans folk rightly pushed back, they counterattacked and defended her. In turn, she refused to abandon the fascists. She brought their voices to the forefront, platformed them, and fellow travelers questioned the association. Oh, I think I've gone back. I think I've gone back a bit. Anyway, other TERFs in interviews have given her soft layups to easily disown the fascists. But she has gone deep enough under their sway that she refused to. Because of the long shadow of her influence, Parker's influence, the question of fascist support was legitimized as a question. TERFs had already been darlings of far-right media, appearing on programs such as Tucker Carlson Tonight. They were invited by Republicans to testify against trans women in congressional sessions to undermine legislation such as the Equality Act. And now, to huge amounts of that group, fascism is no longer a deal breaker. Explicit Nazis are platformed again at their rallies and given access to their followers. Fascists recruit from their circles, those they address online and in person. from the podcasts they produce, and people who go to listen to them on fascist podcasts are then exposed to their ideas.
Not lie, I don't get the shit.
Their ranks grow and fascism gains steam. In 1979, a book titled The Transsexual Empire, the Making of the She-Male by Janice Raymond was published. The central thesis of that book was that trans women are men attempting to colonize women's spaces. Today's TERFs believe the same thing. However, in their campaigns of hate against trans folk, TERFs are now, and as I've said, inviting fascists in to do exactly what they fear from trans women. They're inviting fascists to essentially colonize their circles. Using TERFs as an illustration, we can see that it is easy for people who start out not in support of fascism to be pulled into supporting fascist and fascist ideas. From the starting point of common cause, they then introduce new scapegoats. People who fashion themselves as progressive and have supported some progressive causes, when exposed to the right, can easily fall into their broader projects with a tiny push. I'm going to say now that I've unplugged my earplugs. I think a few people don't have their mics off. Kind of been making me lose my place, so I'll put in my earplugs back when I'm done. Anyway, although it's an important object lesson, TERFs are one small pool that the far right have successfully won support from using transphobic rhetoric, and now in explicit fascist organizations are only one way fascism presents itself. Here in the US, in the land of slave plantations and Jim Crow, fashion does not need to wear a swastika when it can wear a suit and tie and speak from the halls of political power, from church pulpits or from nightly spots on TV schedules. Perhaps it wears a thin blue line flag t-shirt or a Punisher skull rather than a swastika. Maybe it has a Confederate flag. Similarly, the right has a far broader population than TERFs from which to recruit. Today, we see an enormous push invoking child mutilation in the internal canard of queer pedophilia. And now, to be clear, the right-wing movement doesn't care about pedophilia in and of itself. They lionize right-wing pedophiles like Judge Roy Moore. Trump himself sexually assaulted a woman who was 13 years old at the time. He was friends with child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, who Trump calls a terrific guy who likes women on the younger side. Of course, the far right aren't the only ones who overlook ties to Epstein. There aren't a lot of Democrats you'll hear discussing Bill Clinton's friendship with Epstein and his trips on so-called Lolita Express. That said, right-wingers also wholeheartedly support child marriage. And even though a child is much more likely to be sexually assaulted by a straight man, it's queers that they smear because they started with the conclusion that queers are dangerous, and then they worked backwards to shape the argument around that. Their concern is not protecting women from sexual exploitation, it's eradicating queerness.
What about sexual exploitation? I don't really
Therefore, kids must neither express their own queerness nor express the queerness of others. Patriarchy must be upheld, uniformly reinforced, and all must conform to a hierarchy of dominators and dominated in their perfect world. This often appeals to white people, to Christians, to cisgender and heterosexual people, people who have some social traction and some privilege in society. Queer sexuality has always been perceived a threat in US society, and moments where queers win concessions are always followed by a backlash. In the wake of Stonewall, we saw Anita Bryant's Save Our Children's successful campaign to overturn non-discrimination legislation by once again invoking the specter of queer pedophilia. Today, Save the Children, of course, is a common hashtag you see, which has been used to recruit people into QAnon. In the wake of the, I don't know how to pronounce this word, Obergefell versus Hodges SCOTUS ruling, which opened the door for same-sex marriage across the country, the general public has become marginally comfortable with homosexuality, it's okay to have queers in our sitcoms, which has given way to an already tired trope of gay dads. Of course, when we have gay dads, we don't need to think of them beyond comedic antics, dealing with a precocious child, and usually they're too tired to have much of a romantic or sexual life. It's a soft form of neutering. But in meanwhile, today's Supreme Court is signaling support for overturning this ruling, as they did for Roe versus Wade, and in the wake of Roe versus Wade. They put the signal out and more or less invited people to bring cases to the SCOTUS so they could enact that overturning. But for all the culture war push and the push and pull on gay support, gender affirming care is a topic most people don't know a whole lot about. Many people are learning about it for the first time, and often not from truthful or reliable sources. So it's easy to whip up the boogeyman of Frankensteinian doctors performing dreadful disfigurements on vulnerable innocents who are deluded by a shady cabal of villains. To be clear, gender affirming care for minors requires a long-standing and pervasive pattern of a child asserting their true gender, and is given after a lengthy and intensive process. This care takes the form of puberty blockers, which delay puberty and therefore the development of secondary sex characteristics. Developing these characteristics, of course, proves distressing and leaves the patient forever with a body that makes them far more uncomfortable than they otherwise would have had. Such care is very well documented to lead to positive outcomes, including higher self-esteem and reduced suicidal ideation. To the right, though, it is a horror, and to the evangelical right, it is an abomination before an angry God. Puberty blockers are reversible. You can stop taking them.
We do not care.
Child will continue to develop as
I have no
normal.
pubes.
You will always hear the right deny that fact. Try to make it seem worse than it is, and come up with lies about surgeries being offered to someone who walks into a clinic one day or something like that. As we know, the right, specifically fascism, trades on the notion that national greatness has been lost. It sells the idea that the country was great and now it is not, due to being undermined by a scapegoated group. It says the country needs to be restored to a mythic past by breaking scapegoats' influence on society. They must purge the scapegoated element, they believe, and hand in hand with their fetishization of weapons, we can see that the final means that they use is force. They float the idea that the rest of society can avoid their force by simply falling in line, but they know in their end game that this won't happen. There'll be no other option for them, and they look forward to the violence. The elements they believe must be purged include the Voting Rights Act, as we've seen, Black enfranchisement, immigration from the South, secularism, women's autonomy. To be restored is the domination of white men and the subjugation of women. What is more of a threat to the rule of men over women than the idea that the categories of men and women themselves are not immutable? Patriarchy developed
I
hand in
hate
hand with
trannies.
the
I fucking
institution of
hate
private
trannies.
property
I
and
hate trannies.
inheritance among patrilineal lines. As patriarchy developed, so did the gender binary. While the right likes to present the gender binary as eternally universal, it is not. Anthropologists identify past and present cultures, pre-colonial cultures, that have or do recognize multiple genders around the world, as I said, in pre-patriarchal and cooperative societies. Once there is patriarchy in private property, however, Society divides into those who have property and those who have not. And because of the rule of patrilineal inheritance, this happens along the lines of reproductive function. A binary arises and notions of gender are then tied to this function. In the long and genocidal history of colonization from the Christian European sphere, indigenous understandings of gender outside of a binary model are parts of the indigenous culture destroyed. Therefore, to challenge the binary threatens patriarchy. And because we were carried to the present on the back of years of patriarchal societies, it is unthinkable to challenge this with evolving understanding. And acknowledging the diversity of gender models in indigenous cultures exposes imperialist genocide. Despite the modern scientific community's expanding knowledge that biological sex and gender exist on a spectrum, the right insists that they have science on their side, even when presented with the facts. They do so because accepting the falsity of the gender binary is unthinkable to them. To be fair, it's likely that very few care to be aware of the science or history involved. Marjorie Taylor Greene likes to repeat the line, "There are two genders, trust the science," while entirely incurious about what scientific understanding actually has to say about gender. Despite the unearned confidence in former Congressmember Crawthorn's definition of a woman as XX chromosomes, no tallywhacker, this, of course, is not a scientific definition. Chromosomally speaking, there are some who have neither the XX or the XY chromosomal pair associated with male or female biology. They may have a different set. Some people's gonads and genitals develop in ambiguous ways. And some people have reproductive functionality that don't match that which is typical for their chromosomal set. There are, for instance, those who have XY chromosomes who have given birth and have no idea that their chromosomes are not XX. As the sex and gender binaries are challenged in science and in society, as this knowledge starts to leak out, the right wing become afraid and angry. Fear and anger in the face of a changing world, of course, wins Republican votes, and for fascists, it provides an emotional appeal and a call to action. In contrast to the far right's make-believe science, fear-mongering and incendiary violent rhetoric, for Democrats, we are an obstacle. Dems believe that they can reach their desired world by building a broad enough base to vote their enemies out. No matter how bad things get, the belief among the rank and file is that if they can just get people to vote super extra hard next time, they'll somehow turn back the things that scare them. They think that if you can get out the vote and everyone votes, that everyone will vote their way and all will be well forevermore. We know that's not the case. For a whole host of reasons, that's not the case. But when it comes to winning votes in a patriarchal and transphobic society, transgender people are a wedge. We are small in number, yet they'll inevitably be asked about us by reporters and at town halls. In this case, they have to do the political calculus to try to determine whether paying us lip service for the self-styled progressive voter will drive negative voter turnout or cost them the votes of independents. Acceptance for us from the general public is tenuous at best, and with a slight push easily reverses into general acrimony. Being allowed to keep their mouths shut would be a far safer bet than taking a principled stand. But when Republicans make us an issue, this becomes hard to pull off. They have to address us. Sometimes they try an artful dodge. In the 2016 presidential debates, reporter Edward Luce posed the following question to Hillary Clinton. He said, Democrats seem to be going out of their way to lose elections by elevating activist causes, notably the transgender debate, which is relevant only to a small minority. What sense does it make to depict J.K. Rowling as a fascist? End quote. She responded, we are standing on the precipice of losing our democracy, and everything that everyone else cares about then goes out the window. Look, the most important thing is to win the next election. The alternative is so frightening that whatever does not help you win should not be a priority. End quote. Of course, there's always the next election, right? We'll always be told it's the most important election of our lives. And I don't remember any time that a US candidate has told the public that we should vote for them, but that, the stakes are lower than they were last time. They always tell us that their democracy itself is on the line. In this way, they hope to win votes forever. Not for nothing, but which Democratic politician said the author of the most beloved children's book series in the world is bad? Was that the plank on anyone's platform? No. The question was the softest of layups, allowing Clinton to reassure independent voters in 2016 that Democrats weren't about to champion those icky trans folk who don't even wield enough electoral power to make a difference in an election. Of course, she lost, and no conclusion on whether the strategy worked could be drawn. The right wing knows that anytime Democrats express any support of transgender people, they are overall being performative. The far right, on the other hand, are militant and animated by their opposition to transgender people. Democrats, they know, are not likewise animated and are certainly not militant. In many ways, the DNC is where conviction goes to die. Dems can be counted on to sometimes hold a candle and non-violently observe a moment of silence for transgender people under the right conditions. And usually those conditions are whiteness and bourgeois respectability. But while overall Dems will play lip service, in 2023, fascists need us. They rely on the widespread hate and fear that's so successful in animating and recruiting. The world's and their end game is one where we are crushed and destroyed to cleanse their society and serve as a warning to others to get in line. We are an animating force for them and the right wing writ large. So what do? We turn to our greatest weapon, which is solidarity. Far right can't build the base of true solidarity because their ideal world is not solidarity, but submission. They aren't working with the likes of Posey Parker because they see women as equals, and they don't intend to share power just because some women share one of their hatreds. They use TERFs and other individuals from oppressed groups as tools to be used up and discarded. Gay alt-right troll Milo Yiannopoulos was useful until one day he wasn't, and they left him bankrupt and scrambling to regain relevance by claiming he's no longer gay and opening up a conversion therapy torture center. The far right is an ever-tightening circle. As they make steps toward their end goal, they shed allied groups on a last hired, first fired basis. Because what they want is what they see as a cleansing to subjugate or destroy enemy populations and to build a hierarchy of oppressed and oppressors. They want homogeneity. They want everyone to look and act alike. The book bannings, the denial of gender-affirming care, the anti-drag laws that threaten any trans person existing in public, laws defining parents of trans kids as child abusers so that the state can then take their children away and keep them from gender-affirming care. They see the threat that we pose to their vision, and they want us gone. Comparing the act of taking children and placing them into another cultural group with Michael Knowles' CPAC speech, where he said, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely, we start to see genocidal ideas gaining steam. While folks quibble over definitions whenever this is pointed out, all the work they've been doing, the recruitments they've gained from fear-mongering, the alliances they've made with TERFs and others, it's all conferred into this push of eradicating transgenderism. And make no mistake, this can only mean eliminating transgender people. We're in their sights. They've been working to build up the cultural machinery needed to destroy transgender lives, and they will not be satisfied to stop at us. It wasn't long ago when nearly everyone balked when fascist was said. Over time, we've been seeing it used more frequently, sometimes even in mainstream media, as people have examined the meaning of the word. We need to do the same for the word genocide. Genocide is one of those heavily charged words that we are loath to trot out in a cavalier manner. I'm not comfortable with it myself. But what is clear is that the right wants to, once more, eradicate us. Therefore, when we find ourselves asking, are transgender people really a distinct cultural group that can be genocided, we need to reflect on the facts that this question keeps presenting itself in the first place. The left can be lamentably prone to division. I think we've all seen that at various times. Sometimes for better reasons than others. However, where the right has to content itself with alliances that will end up as a scramble to betray before being betrayed, we can achieve solidarity because we want a cooperative society. We don't want a world divided with oppressors subjugating oppressed. We want an end to oppression. As we recognize solidarity as our greatest strength, we need to understand that when the solidarity falters, we are left open to division. To leave any oppressed group behind leaves us vulnerable to a wedge that can be used to divide us and leaves the radical power that we can be unused and wasted. Right-wingers sometimes ask why so many trans folk are communists. The fact is, we need to be. In 2019, we saw unemployment levels at 23.6%. We are refused promotion or outright fired at a 30% rate. 78 of us report workplace harassment. We are 4 times more likely than the general population to make under $10,000 a year. 1 in 4 of us lose jobs due to discrimination. 1 in 5 face discrimination in seeking housing, and the same numbers experience houselessness at the same rate at some time. As the Molotov throwing legend of the Stonewall Uprising, Sylvia Rivera said, "We were all involved in different struggles, including myself and many other transgender people. But in these struggles, we were still outcasts. The only reason they tolerated the transgender community in some of these movements was because we were gung-ho, we were frontliners, we didn't take no shit from nobody. We had nothing to lose." This is still the case today. We need the radical energy of oppressed peoples, and we can't take transgender revolutionary potential off the board. Leave the view of us as a wedge to Democrats. We don't want the status quo, and we cannot make their mistakes. So, yes, we defend Drag Queen Story Hour. When they talk about drag, they mean all trans people. And even if they didn't, as drag performers are oppressed queer peoples, we stand with them in solidarity. When they attack gender-affirming healthcare, we protect trans people's ability to survive and thrive in a hostile world. As they criminalize the parents of trans youth and try to transfer trans children into a system that seeks to crush their thriving and drive them into suicide, we fight back. When they pull books that accurately describe our existences from libraries or burn them. We defend knowledge of ourselves out in the world available to all. The knowledge to help people understand and build compassionate relationships with oppressed people, and the knowledge of trans kids to understand and have compassion for themselves is sacrosanct. We do all of this not just to uplift queer people. We do this because to achieve victory, we cannot be divided, we cannot concede an inch, and we cannot compromise by giving up on any poor, working class, or oppressed peoples, because when they do, they slide in the knife to split us down the middle. So stand with us, fight with us, and arm in arm and hand in hand, march with us into the world to come. We have a world to win and nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cassandra. We'll take questions from online and also the audience here, if anyone has them. Comments or questions? Mike? No. Cheryl, you want to come over? I think come over here. You can sit. You should be.
Hi, Cassie. This is Cheryl.
Hi.
Hi. I'm really sorry you weren't able to go to Cuba with the delegation for the Days Against Homophobia and Transphobia. Maybe the next time.
That would be great.
I don't really have a question. I want to thank you for your presentation, though. It is a critical, it's a critical issue. It's the issue that the right wing is trying desperately to divide the working class and make it okay. I mean, we've seen, and I'm sure you talked about, apologize for being late. The Montana, where actually, I take heart because a trans woman was actually elected to the Montana legislature.
Yeah.
But the treatment that she's gotten for speaking out, and the fact that there are people who are mobilizing to support her, all of these things show the possibilities for the demonstration that's being planned for Florida to confront all of the issues that you raised. It's also the book burning, they came out with this new thing. DeSantis said that slavery actually helped people who were enslaved, which is, talk about turning things on their head. Really some kind of united opposition. Even today at Joanne Watson's funeral, one of the, Black leaders here in Detroit historically, it was raised that Florida needs a Joanne Watson. Florida actually needs a lot of the people who moved from other places to Florida to find a way to end the oppressive conditions that are being perpetrated, there was a tremendous upsurge a few years ago that won the right for people who had been convicted to vote. And then they found a way to put a poll tax on it, basically, so that people couldn't reassume their rights. So it does go to the basis of class society and patriarchy, and really is a powerful weapon in our hands as communists.
Mhm.
So sorry to go on, but thank you, Cassie.
No problem. Yeah, it's interesting to see Montana. I forget the politician's name. If I recall correct, she's the one that Congressional Freedom Caucus types made a statement about, because she said something I guess that was not her knowing her place. And of course they all scrambled with the wrong pronouns. And you know, it's funny because sometimes you will hear right-wingers start to address a trans person and instinctively use the correct pronoun, and then have to catch themselves and use the other one. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, Florida is really scary. That like you said, that thing about trying to teach that slaves were taught useful skills. I just think, you know, they already had useful skills. What they needed were guns. But yeah, Florida's scary. Guess that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
I had my hand raised. I don't know if you can see it, but
Go ahead.
okay. Yeah, thank you, Cassie, so much for your presentation. It was really thorough and very much appreciated. I did want to apologize for the 3 different people that joined the Zoom with intentions of harassing and disrupting. And it was really disturbing to see that's, you know, it kind of speaks to a lot of the things you talked about in terms of the fascist right wing, that instead of people who really want to or need to hear this discussion being on the Zoom, we have 3 different people that joined with intentions of disrupting the meeting, and you know, we had to kick them out. And I'm just sorry that, you know, sometimes it takes a minute to figure out if they're disrupting or just having something else going on. But I'm really sorry that happened. So and I wanted to thank Cheryl for mentioning the upcoming action in Florida, and maybe she can give some more details on that later. But yeah, the point you made, Cassie, in terms of the so-called progressive and liberal Dems being very weak supporters of LGBTQ and especially trans rights and freedoms as part of their movement is really true. You know, I just constantly see it where, you know, when it becomes uncomfortable to raise those issues and they're trying to just get more votes or whatever they're trying to do, that's the first thing they're going to drop. And it's just really scary to see that happening. But I'm really excited that you're writing and talking about these things, and it's important that you keep doing that because people need to hear it. And I know that a lot of people, even though they may not have been able to join the Zoom tonight, are eager to read more analysis like what you offered. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't sure what was going on with those people either, but kind of lost my place a bit. So yeah. And Democrats, you know, their whole thing, you saw it with the marriage equality thing, is that they were all like there were no Democrat politician, really, certainly no one at the presidential level, was in support of same gender marriage until the ruling came down from the Supreme Court, and then they all put up their rainbow flags and such. You know, they're opportunists. What else can you say? I remember Bill Clinton made his first campaign, he made some gestures of, okay, we're going to support gay people, we promise. And then he did Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and he happily supported and signed the Defense of Marriage Act. So I think now that the public has a bit more support, we see a little bit more from them, but still fair weather friends. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking, especially since it's you mentioning the harassment we got. You remember when we were doing the 1-year anniversary for Charlottesville, and those people came by and saw us out there, and they shouted that we were being anti-white. Downtown San Francisco. Yeah, there's always shitheads around. What can you do? That's all.
Taking any other questions or comments? Well, hearing none, we want to thank Cassie again and look forward to repeating this some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been great. Thanks for being such a good audience.
Okay, so
Bye.
shouldn't have a camera.
Sure. Did you want to respond to what Toby said about what's happening in Florida or whatever?
She's off already, but
So, okay.
we'll get,
More to say about
yeah,
Oh,
if when we get more information about the October 7th, right?
October 6th.
6th in Florida, national demonstration.
Oh,
We'll
sorry.
get that information out.
You're right.
Okay, and we had October 7th, and Cheryl has some leaflets here, and so we'll send that out as appropriate. Want to thank everybody and wish you well.
Good to see you.
Take care. Good night. Meeting is now adjourned.
Isn't
All right.
it Sharon?
Good night.
Good night.
Michael, there was one other person that I couldn't read their name in the list. Somebody else was on the call.